Hello and welcome to this quick introduction to the GFPOP GUI. In this introduction, I'm going to talk about running the GFPOP GUI, executing the GFPOP algorithm within the application, making some basic modifications to a constraint graph, and then saving and loading data. So you can run the GFPOP GUI in two ways, either locally through R, like we're going to do here, or through a web server that you can find right here. For now, we're going to focus on the local version. So once you go ahead and load the GFPOP GUI, you can just run the app like that. And we're greeted with an introductory page that has some instructions on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side are some data upload and generation options. For now, I'm just going to generate some random data. In other videos, we'll talk about uploading your own data and also the data generation options. So you see here that we've uploaded some random data. We see that here, and that the application automatically provides a standard constraint graph. So since we have our data uploaded, we can move to the Analysis tab. Here we have three columns. This first column is for global settings and for saving and loading. The middle column is for our constraint graph options. And the third column is for our change points and our data. So right off the bat, to run this application, we can go to the Settings tab and to the Run GFPOP button. So there we go. We see that we've generated some change points, and down here we have the output. So here's the different states that each of our change points are in, the X location of each of those change points, and the mean of those change points. And if we click on the More tab, we can see exactly what GFPOP outputs, including a global cost. So now going back over to this middle column, we can see on this first tab basically a verbose output of what our constraint graph is. So all of the edges and all of their parameters and all of the nodes. On this middle tab, we can see exactly what goes to GFPOP. So this is a condensed form of what we're seeing up here, as well as the R code that corresponds to this graph. Back on the View Edit tab, you can see that we have some more graph options down here. So for example, we can generate one of the default graphs, such as an up-down graph like this. So I can click Update Graph, and now we have that. And by the way, in these graph settings, there's an option to show null edges or not. And that can be convenient to make things a little bit cleaner. So for now, let's go back to a standard graph, and let's increase the penalty a little bit so we can see that. So I can update this standard graph, and now it has a higher penalty. And we see if we rerun GFPOP, we have fewer change points. There's also some extra options down here that we can talk more about later. We can set starting and ending nodes, and we can add and remove edges and nodes down here. So using these drop-down menus is one way to add and remove edges and nodes from your graph. The other way is to do it directly on the graph right here. So for example, let's say we wanted to manually change this to an up-down graph. So let's make this node down now. And now we're going to add another up node here. Up. And I'm going to go ahead and not show null edges. And so since this is up-down, we want to delete this edge. And we click the Add Edge button. So from down to up is an up edge. So I put up here. And then see, so parameter in this case, for an up edge, the parameter is the gap. But parameter is just a more general way of saying that. So here's an up. And now we're going to add an edge from up to down. See, I click the edge and that click Edit Edge to turn this into a down type. So I go ahead and save that, and now I can rerun GFPOP. And notice here that if I hover over these change points, the associated node is also highlighted. So see, this is a down change region, and when I move to the up change region, you see it moves the highlight on the left side to a different node. All right, and similarly here, if I click on up, it highlights all of the up change points. If I click on down, it highlights all of the down change points. So that's handy. There's also more ways to edit this graph. So for example, let's say I'm looking at the GFPOP graph view here, and this is the condensed view, and all of a sudden I decide I want my up change point, my up edge to be to have a much higher penalty. I can actually change it directly here to 100. We see it changes up here with the graph, and now if we rerun GFPOP, we'll see that change. And of course, we can go ahead and change it back to 10 and rerun GFPOP, and we're back there. We can also force certain starts and ends. So for example, right now we start in a down, we start in a down, and we end also in a down. So let's say we wanted to change that where we have to start in an up. So I can say let's start in an up and also end in an up. And when I do that, so if a node is both a start and an end node, it gets a star here. And then you can rerun GFPOP, and we see that it makes it a little funky. So on this, we can actually zoom in by clicking and holding. And you see now we can see where that little tiny change point is in order to make up our final change region, our final node, our final state. So star is if it's both the start and end. If we wanted to change it so up is the start but not the end, or not necessarily the end, we can do that. And then so triangles represent starts. And then finally, if we said, okay, we also want to end on a down and apply that. So squares are for end. And then of course we need to rerun GFPOP to make that go into effect. So that's the basics of editing a graph. And remember, if we want to go back and now use this graph for some other analysis outside of this application, we can go down to current graph and we can just copy this R code. Other options we can have is we could save this. So this could be, for example, my up down, and I can save it. And then I can come load it at a different time. So maybe I make some changes to this graph. I add a node, and we go here. By the way, so I just added a node, and notice when I added the node, it automatically got a null edge. And there's an option here to either automatically add recursive null edges or not. So you can disable that option if you don't like it. So let's say I added some things here, and then I decide, okay, I don't want this anymore. Well, I can go to load, and now I can load the previous graph. So there it is. And then the final option here to talk about, I suppose, is the enable crosstalk button. So especially on the online server, sometimes, especially with lots of data and a big graph, it gets a little intensive to do this crosstalk where you highlight a node here and it highlights the associated change points. So you can turn that option off if you want, and then see it no longer happens. So that can save you some compute time for large data. So we've now gone over how to change this graph. We've gone over the crosstalk between these two graphs, the GFPOP output, and basic saving and loading. The final thing is if you want to export this data to use it later, you can go to the Sharing tab. And under the Sharing tab, we get on this right column a quick overview of our data. We have the constraint graph here, we have our current change points, and our data overlain with change points. And here we can either download the whole analysis as an RData file, we can download the current graph in a CSV or an R format, and we also can download the current change points. And if you click these, it just opens a download menu for you to save that data. So that's about it, and then there'll be a couple other videos for more specifics. Thanks for watching.